is from Management Advisory Service, and he will be presenting today's webinar on board evaluation. If anyone has questions during the webinar, please feel free to pose them in the questions box. There will also be a couple of polls during the course of the webinar, so please feel free to answer them. There will also be a survey at the end to assess your impressions of the webinar. I hope the information will be useful for you, and I'll be handing the control of the webinar over to Bill right now. Bill, thank you.
Thanks, Emily, and thanks everyone for bearing with all our technical difficulties. In fact, when we get to board evaluation drill downs, there's a little part there around IT, so you might enjoy that. It's a pleasure to be with you today and to talk about board evaluation, one of the most important components in the life of a board of directors and indeed the life of a whole agency. So what we're going to cover today, so we're going to look at board performance and board self-assessment models and tools and resources available that you can use. And most of these resources are free online. We'll talk about those, and we have a whole reference sheet for you at the end of the seminar that you can download with live clicks and go to different websites and drill down on those. We're going to look at board assessment in the 4 big areas that the board needs to look at. So we're going to look at how the board shapes mission, vision, and strategic direction, how the board ensures leadership and resources, how the board monitors and improves performance, and then how the board is able to improve itself and areas. But before we do that, just a couple of participatory polls for you here. How many of you have ever done a board assessment? Can you just take a moment and type in a yes if you've done that?
This is in the polls section on the GoToWebinar software. Give me just a moment and I will get it running for you.
Then we'll give you some results. If you're a typical audience, most of you have not ever done a board assessment. But occasionally I'm surprised, so that would be nice. But if you're a small organization, you may not be doing this. And of course, it's one of the things that you want to be doing.
So far right now, I'm seeing 38% saying yes, and 40% saying yes, and 60% saying no.
Okay, well that's not bad. That's pretty good. So I'm impressed. So as we go along, think of the board assessments that you have done and how these might compare with some of the tips and strategies that we're going to look at in the next hour and a quarter. So great. Then the second question here is around the resources that are available to you this year. So if you are part of the Maximizing Governance project being sponsored by the City of Toronto and OCASI, then these resources are available to you, and I commend them. I've looked at them. I think they're good. So how many of you are already utilizing the OrgWise website and their tools and resources? And how many of you are accessing the free Onboard Canada diversity, inclusion, board evaluations and board assessments? So just answer yes if you're doing that for either of those two.
So far, we see that 74% of the participants have voted. 93% say no.
Okay. Well, I commend these resources to you because if you're part of the governance project this year, they're free. So use them, and I like them. And we're going to take a look at a couple of samples of things that they offer from those, along with other organizations in the next hour or so. So great. And just one thought too, if you are from the same organization, now you may be online and not know, but if you find out that you have both been through this webinar together, or if you've had agency members, board members that have been to the workshop that we did on Monday night, if you get together and start to compare notes, and if you're one of the agencies that doesn't do board assessments, doesn't do board evaluations, then you might be able to put your heads together and say, okay, can we convince the board that we should be doing this on a regular basis? So that would be great. So, okay, there are many samples for a quick board assessment. So let's just do one now. I just want to show this to you. This is from the United Way of Calgary. So, and they're saying here that the board needs to ensure that they're holding organized and accountable to its mission and vision, the stakeholders, and they receive open and transparent communication about the organization, that the practices are ethical and sound, and the board itself is committed to continuous improvement and programmatic improvement. So you could just, as we go this down, just answer this yes or no in your own mind here. Empowerment and accountability. So in the governance policies, has each of the board roles and responsibilities been clearly defined? Yes or no? Now that implies that you've got governance policies. So think about that too. Is there a board orientation package? And the United Way of Calgary says if there is, great. If you're in the Calgary area, they would like to see it. In the board orientation package, are the board policies outlining roles and responsibilities included? So I've sat on many boards of directors, and I've been the executive director of a couple of organizations, and most organizations have got a board orientation package with the policies and the articles of incorporation and the bylaws and the last annual audited financial statement and the last annual report in it, all essential items for board members to know. But I've also sat on boards where it's been a couple of years since I've seen any of those, and new board members never received those. So it's important in terms of orientation. And then, is the board orientation completed within the first 6 months of the start date of the new board member? Leadership and stewardship. Does the organization have a strategic plan or a business plan? Has the organization's strategic plan been updated in the last year? Do you have an annual review? If you have a 3 to 5 year strategic plan, do you take it off the shelf and make sure that you're looking at it at least once a year? Actually, do you have a way of reporting on it when you have a board meeting? Does it have clear goals and targets? Does it articulate activities to achieve these targets? So how are you going to accomplish these things? Does the strategic plan or business plan communicate the content, implement, evaluation of the strategic plan to the stakeholders? So the important folks that you are accountable to, your members, the stakeholders, the partners, your clients, does it have a way to communicate to those folks that we're getting ahead, we've got a good story here. Does the organization have protocols for coaching and training their board members? So if people need training, is that accessible? Does the board have a way of assessing its own training needs and setting an education agenda for itself? Does the board chair participate in any board development training, or has the board chair done that? So that, there's an art and a skill to running a meeting. There's an art and a skill to being the chair of a board. And then have you got a way of determining length of time on the board? Is the average length of stay of the board members reasonable? 2 years to 6 years. There are some boards where you can be on the board for life. That's okay if that's what your bylaws say. But is there a way of bringing new energy onto the board also? Is the board currently operating at full capacity? So that's often an indicator of how healthy a board is and are the skills needed for your organization on that board. Is the role of the board chair filled with a permanent occupant and you not just have an interim chair all of the time? And then communication and transparency. So has the organization held an annual meeting in the past year? Those are the requirements if you're a not-for-profit agency and a registered charity. There's a little bit of leeway in terms of 18 months, but you want to have regular annual general meetings. Does the annual report clearly convey the organization's mission? And I want to say also the accomplishments. So if you've got a good story or if you've got challenges, do people know? Can people say, great, how can we support? Has the organization demonstrated a clear link between their activities and the mission? So you can say, this is what we do, and we are active in these areas. Has the organization posted their annual report and audited financial statement on their website? So more and more organizations are doing that, and it's becoming something that the public and people interested in joining the organization or supporting the organization or even interested in joining the board of directors look for now. What's the transparency of the organization on your social media and website? And just a couple more things here. Service and fairness. Is there a conflict of interest policy, clearly outlined procedures for employees? I want to include board members too in that. Is your bylaws clear around conflict of interest for board members? Accomplishments and measurement. So do you perform board assessments? I'm glad to see that 40% of you do. Fantastic. Has the organization performed board assessments within the last year? So do you do this annually? I've got a couple of examples later on too, besides this United Way of Calgary one. Does the organization report progress reports towards the strategic plan's performance measurements? Do you do that annually? Do you do that quarterly? Do you have a way of doing that a little bit of every board meeting? So the big four here. So just think of what we've just done with United Way of Calgary. That's a nice way of looking at these four different areas in different words. Shaping the mission, vision, and strategic direction, ensuring leadership and resources, monitoring and improving performance, and then enabling yourself as a board of directors to become better and better. So there's part one. Now we'll stop after each part for questions. So if questions arise to you, type them in, and then at the end of part one, we'll give Emily a chance to read them out and I can answer them for you, or try to. Okay. So mission, strategic direction. We want to have the role of the board in clarifying and having a clear mission and vision. We want the board to be participating in and approving strategic and policy decisions. And we want the board to have a measurable way of seeing that you having an impact from your strategic plan and regular reports on it. Okay. So just some sample board assessment tools here for mission and vision. So org-wise, I commend to you, they have a nice yes and no clear statement here on strategic leadership. Our organization has a clear mission, vision, and set of values. So just think, all the folks out there online, can you say that about your organization? Do you know it well enough to be able to have a conversation in an elevator with a friend who says, oh, I hear you're on this, what do you guys do? And then Board Source also has a nice way of rating this. So periodically, are you reviewing and agreeing on how the organization should fulfill its mission? And you can rate this from poor to excellent or I don't know. Are you articulating a vision that is distinct from the mission? So what you do in order to accomplish, but the end point you want. How is the world going to look better if you actually accomplish what you want to do in your mission? Organizational values, are they clear? Do you know what those values are all about? And then using the organization's mission and values to drive decisions. and you can rate yourself on all of that from poor to excellent. And Board Source in the United States has lots and lots of free resources when you go to their website. They also have some paid resources. They love to sell you stuff, but they have lots of free resources also. So just an example of a clear mission. So Right to Play. So Right to Play works to protect, educate, and empower children to rise above adversity using the power of play. So very simple, direct, and you get an idea immediately about what Right to Play is trying to do. And then they have a vision statement too. I don't think it's quite as clear as their great mission statement, but their ultimate goal is to help communities develop self-sustaining programming. Not bad. The John Howard Society has a nice end statement. So if you're into the John Carver policy governance model, end statements is what Carver likes. But here's their vision. Just, humane, and smart solutions to crime and its causes. So they're saying their endpoint is we can't expect to ever have a world that's free of crime or free of the causes underlying the manifestations of crime, but we want to have just, humane, and smart solutions to those things. We want to be able to reduce those things. Org-wise, around values. So they have a great checklist here. It's geared towards their clientele, the immigrant and refugee communities, but you can insert your own target groups here. So our organization engages with, responds to, and measures our impact on the client group. Our organization is committed to a client-centered approach and all the things that would mean. Organization facilitates client and community capacity building. If you drill down farther here, improving conditions for the client group, addresses systemic issues that impact the lives of the folks that you're trying to serve. So it's not just individuals and small groups. What are the big socio-political economic things that surround and cause challenges for the clientele? It's committed to an anti-oppression, equity, and accessibility within the organization and all it does. And you can download actually anti-oppression principles and practices from the internet. If you Google those, there are lots, and they're pretty good. Keeps informed about the barriers to accessing services that exist for the diversity. The organization has made improvements and changes to address those barriers, so you're accountable for taking on those things. And then communications and collaborations. So a collaborative approach with other organizations to best serve the clientele. So is your board of directors operating in isolation? Do you see the folks that are in similar service areas to yourselves as the competition, or are you working together to try and have maximum impact with the target group that you're trying to be of assistance to? And our organization communicates with broad community and external stakeholders, so people know what's going on. They know the good things that you're doing, and they also know the challenges and the things where you need some assistance with and people can help on. So great value system there. So just some board assessment tools for knowing that you're participating in and approving strategic and policy decisions. So we're going to look at the Management Advisory Service Stakeholders Checklist in a moment, but org-wise is this nice statement. Our organization regularly engages in strategic thinking and planning. Okay. So you can think about that, yes or no. We're going to look at McKinsey & Company on a few things also, but let's look at MASS here. Their students, partners, donors, public, all of those folks we say we're going to involve in our strategic planning process. If you're from a big organization, of course, that can be several meetings and consultations and can spread over weeks. If you're from a small organization, it can be 1 or 2 meetings where you've got folks together and you're gathering data, and then you've got a think tank or a half day when you're putting it all together and developing a strategy and a strategic plan. McKinsey and Company. So McKinsey and Company has an office in town. You may know where they are. They're south of Bloor Street, just to the north end of the University of Toronto campus. Um, and they have all of these resources you can download for free. They're proprietary, of course. So if you're going to hire a facilitator to do any of this, they want to be the facilitator that you hire. But the process for strategic planning and quality of board participation. So there's a formal process for board involvement. It involves specific frameworks, timing, and content for the whole strategic planning process. And it's got the joint board and staff involved and ownership with some board members heavily involved. There's active discussion by the entire board, supported and needed by facts and materials beforehand if needed, data's gathering. So if you're doing a typical strategic plan with strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, you've got all of that data to think about beforehand. You've got a planning process with strong board membership. Often we think about in the traditional way that a board would operate, the vice president of the board is the chair of a strategic planning committee, because the vice president has a view to succeeding as the president. So when that person becomes the president, they will know what the future plan is for the board. What's the long range plan? So those things are all in account and being thought of. Quality of strategic plans. So there's a robust plans covering all of the key strategic areas that you can think of, and it's linked to the mission and vision. And then there's agreement on distinction between the board level and the management level. So the board and staff are getting together. They're looking at all the things that are important in the strategic plan, but the board is setting the direction and approving that direction. And then the staff, if you have staff, are carrying that out. Of course, if it's a working board with no staff, some of you will come from completely voluntary boards of directors with no staff, then of course you are also responsible for carrying out the plan. But normally the board ensures that the plan is being carried out and is receiving regular reports back from staff. And here's a way from the Ontario Organizational Development Program, a nice assessment tool that you can use on this. So our organization has a multi-year strategic plan, a clear set of long-range goals and priorities, and you can rate that from 1 poor to 5 excellent with comments. These are all nice little sheets that you can use to rate how is the board doing in these areas. The board meeting agenda clearly reflects our strategic plan and priorities. So there are some areas where some board agenda meetings where the executive director's report will be related to the strategic plan. And if your strategic plan is detailed enough to have a 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, 2.1, 2.2, 2.3, the executive director will actually label those points and say what's the progress on those areas. The board has a current annual board work plan, so it comes out of the strategic plan. It says, what are we going to accomplish this year in order to be able to say that we're moving in the direction that we want to do as a board of directors in the 3 to 5 year plan. The board has ensured that the organization also has an annual operational plan, so that the 3-year plan is broken down into 1-year chunks and you can measure how you're doing. And it's resourced. That's part of the human resources and the financial resources of the organization and your programming. And the board gives direction to staff on how to achieve the organizational mandate, the strat goals, and you're doing this by mainly referring to policies. We're going to get back in a little bit to a famous phrase from Management Advisory Service, nose in, fingers out. So to what degree are you ensuring that, and you're comfortable with and satisfied with, these things are happening? So we just want to ensure that the strat plan is not left on the shelf. There's a clear reporting progress and process back to you. It could be at each board meeting. It could be a quarterly. For sure, you want to have an annual one, but I think you don't want to wait for an annual review of the plan. You want to know how is it going on a regular basis. Often the executive director will do that. There are some boards that present a strategic planning monitor. They appoint a strategic planning monitor to do that. Emily, we got a...
We are having a few more technical difficulties. I apologize for the brief break in the audio. Everything should be running well again. But Bill, if you wouldn't mind repeating what you just said from that slide.
Okay, so just we want to ensure that strat plan is not left on the shelf. You've got regular ways of reporting coming back on that. Sometimes it's through the executive director. There are some boards that will appoint a board member as a strategic planning monitor. So it's their job to make sure that the board is up to date on the progress. And they'll meet with the executive director, and then the board member will give a short report. So there is an annual review of the strategic plan, and you know what progress is being made, what adjustments. Are you on the right highway? Are you off the road? Does the highway need to change? And that there is a clear multi-year planning cycle every 3 to 5 years for a strategic plan. These years move fast. So I think a 3-year plan is probably more appropriate than a 5-year plan. So any questions that you've got on part 1?
The questions pane in the GoToWebinar software has disappeared. I just wanted to explain a bit about the technical difficulties that we've been having. The main computer that we usually use for the webinars is having some issues, so we have had to go to a laptop. The laptop might be slightly underpowered for the software, so I'm going to ask that if you have any questions, please send them to me by email. My email address is emooney, MOONEY @ocasi.org, and we're happy to take your questions there. You can email them to me at any time during the rest of the presentation, and Bill will get to them.
Very good. And if we don't get to them during the time that we have together, I can certainly confer with Emily, and we can get back to you with what I think might be the best answer. Okay, great. So, but keep those questions coming. Great. So part 2, we want to look at how the board ensures leadership and resources. So components here, select, evaluate, and develop the chief executive officer or the executive director, as they're often called. Sometimes it's the president and chief executive officer. I always get a bit confused myself when the chair of the board is called the president and your chief executive officer is called the president. In the old days, the chair of the board would be the president of the organization, and that's changed over the last 20 years. So now sometimes you have a president and CEO, and then you have a person who's the chair of the board. The CEO is often paid staff, and the chair of the board is, of course, a volunteer. So we want to look at how do we select, evaluate, and develop the chief executive officer, making sure that the board has adequate financial resources and that there's expertise within the organization and on the board to meet organizational needs. And then how does the board ensure that we are building reputation? What's the role of the board in that? So from the OODP, a very simple one. The board recruits, supports, and develops the executive director. You can rate that 1 to 5 from poor to good. So recruits, supports, and develops. 3 key areas there. Now McKinsey & Company has a drill down on this. So succession planning. The board has explicit view on succession and actively works with the CEO to identify internal candidates and provide development opportunities for the top 3 to 5 candidates to round out their skills. So is the board always looking at what do you have to do if the chief executive officer, hopefully you've got a wonderful chief executive officer and you're not having to look at that person leaving because they are not working out, but you can have a chief executive officer wonderful and they move on to a position, they get hired away, they get lured away. So you've lost your great person. You can also, of course, have tragedy. The CEO can get sick. The CEO could be killed crossing the street in a car accident. We don't want to think of these things. They can happen. What's your succession plan? So that you're not caught in an emergency situation. Evaluations and development process are performed at least annually. So many organizations will have the annual evaluation of the chief executive officer. It will be done in camera without the CEO president, but they often will have the CEO write up their own evaluation for the board to consider. There'll be 360-degree evaluations from other staff, clientele, stakeholders, how the CEO is doing. And then the board will have a time when they can operate in session, and there's an annual evaluation, and there's a compensation decision around that too. So these days, annual performance evaluations are often linked to salary considerations. And there's pros and cons to doing that. You can debate back and forth whether you want to do that, but that's often done today. And the search process, so there's a formal search criteria of what is necessary, but also what do you expect? The job description of the executive director is up to date. It's relevant to the needs of the organization. You have a criteria of the kind of person that you want to recruit when it's time to recruit a person. So, and there are internal and external candidates reviewed, and there's a true choice between qualified candidates that can be made. So you have the criteria of what you are looking for in the chief executive officer. So sample board assessment tools here for adequate financial resources. So OrgWise has a great statement. Financial management practices are in line with legal, regulatory, and funded requirements, as well as sound financial management practices. Yes, no, your own feeling around that. And then McKinsey & Company has a drill down. So on financial needs assessment, the board works with staff as part of the strategic planning process to develop a multi-year view of funding requirements and trade-offs embedded in the different resource levels. And the board feels strong ownership for the targets. So it's not just an annual budget, it's what do we need in order to accomplish our strategic plan. You've got a big picture on the financial needs of the organization. The board is also looking at individual donations, so all board members financially support the organization. Now, that can be difficult. Not all board members have a lot of money. I sat on a board of directors, an international board of directors. It had people from all over the world, and we had a good degree of client representation on that board. Organizations we were partnering with around the world and trying to assist, those folks didn't have a lot of money. The board was operating at a 20% capacity for donations. No one had ever asked the board to contribute. So I happened to be the board treasurer that year, and myself and a francophone member of the board said, well, we think we can improve the situation. So we simply asked the board, if you can afford to give to this organization and you believe that this organization is worthwhile giving to, can you do it, please? We got to 80% in one board meeting. 20% of the folks struggled with that because they didn't have a lot of money. Many of them were for overseas. We said, can you afford to give something no matter how small, so that we can say that 100% of our board members are contributing to the organization? And they did that. So it didn't matter whether it was large, didn't matter whether it was small. We got 100% of the board financially contributing. Now, some of you are still not in a position where you can do that, but you can contribute through your volunteer time and capacity. And that can also be noted as a contribution. So, and also then there's involvement in fundraising and planning and execution. So you can develop a plan to meet fundraising targets. Many boards of directors will bring in folks that can develop a strategic fundraising plan. The board introduces staff to potential donors and drives fundraising activities when necessary. So some people on boards are well connected in the community. They believe in the cause of the organization. They have no problem talking this up to their friends. They have no problem having coffee, things in their houses, no problem standing up in front of meetings and saying, this is a very worthwhile organization. So, assessment tools here to provide expertise and access for organizational needs. So one of the big things here is board composition, and we will look at that a little bit later on, and skill matrices that can bring the skills and expertise that is needed for the organization so that the board can give advice and direction in these areas, and that they can help you when your board recruitment and selection to prioritize the expertise that's needed for the organization. Reputation. So if you remember, for some of you that were at the risk management seminar that Chris Govern gave for this series, and the webinar that she gave that you can find on the OCASI website now, and you can download all of the past webinars and look at those and hear them and listen to them. They're all really good. But reputational risks, fundraising, programs, staff morale, partnerships. So we just want to be aware of those because they can damage your reputation. So if you have a negative fundraising campaign that gets the wrong message out, or several big organizations have gotten in trouble because they were raising for a cause. Everybody thought it was for a specific cause, but it was really for their general coffers. And the message was a bit misleading. So the organization got really damaged in its reputation, and the next fundraising campaign was not as good. Programs, where the programs are not being rated, and you're not continually improving the programs, and so that the clients and your stakeholders are feeling the programs are not getting the result. There's an old rule in for-profit sector around 80-20. I don't know if you know that rule, but 20% of your programs which are not meeting the needs should be looked at and reviewed, and if they can't be improved, then you get rid of them. And you bring 20% new programs on so that you're continuously looking at improving your program model. On that 80% you're keeping because they're working well, but there's 20% you're looking at how do you improve them or offload them, and how do you bring on new things and new innovations. Staff morale. So you want to have a human resource policy that honors your staff and recognizes the hard work of your staff. Sometimes that can't always be done financially. So what other things are done sometimes for free that can keep staff together, united in team and feeling good about working? Then partnerships. So you're not reporting to your partners. The partners don't know what's going on. They don't know the successes. They don't know the challenges. They feel isolated. They're not, and this can be often to your funders also. Your funders don't feel that they're understanding what's going on in accomplishments and challenges for the organization. So you want to be aware and working in all of those areas to keep your reputation going. So the board understanding the reputation objectives and the role of the board can play in enhancing reputation. So the needs for reputation building based on strategic view of the organizational objectives, and they're identified in detail. And there's ways in which individual board members can assist in building those reputations. You may know people in the community. You may have those contacts. You may be, the United Way likes to have folks sitting on boards who are from your clientele. Can the clientele be talking about, hey, this is a good program. We should be supporting this program. We should be attending this program. Board members are proactively reaching out in the community, building awareness and excitement about the organization. and there seem to be very effective ambassadors in the organization. So we talk about the 1 minute and 3 minute time on the elevator with folks. You can know what to say. So Imagine Canada has a whole set of standards, which I commend to you to look at, and there are many organizations that work towards being accredited by Imagine Canada. And here's the one around identifying stakeholders and ensuring there's a strategy for regular and effective communication and consultation with them about the organization's achievement and work. We have strategies and practices used to communicate and consult with your stakeholders so you are building your reputation. And then a couple of things from Dalhousie University from their board self-evaluation questionnaire. The board ensures the organization's accomplishments and challenges are communicated to members and stakeholders. You can rate that 1 to 5. The board has ensured that members and stakeholders receive reports on how the organization has used its financial and human resources. So you've got both program reports and you've got finances that are transparent and accessible to the folks that you want to build reputation on. Are any questions on part 2?
Again, you can submit questions by email to eMooney, MOONEY, at ocasi.org, and I will be keeping an eye on my inbox and more than happy to pass questions along to Bill. We are here to meet your needs, so please don't hesitate to ask.
Okay. Thanks, Emily. So let's look at part 3 here, monitoring and improving performance. So the board's role in overseeing financial and risk management, and then monitoring organizational performance, administration, and program. And then I got a special part here around improving board performance. We're going to look at that in part 4. That's the self-enabling of the board. So financial and risk management. So first of all, I want to commend to you the 2 previous workshops and webinars on this. So the whole financial management webinar by Brian Tranqueir of Mass in April, and then the risk management seminar and webinar by Chris Govern of Mass in May 2019. Those are excellent drill downs on financial management and risk management. I know some of you have attended those workshops. Some of you have been to those, have listened in on the webinars. They are very valuable, so keep those and use them. McKinsey & Company has got a drill down here that's it's good to look at. The board role in financial planning, so the board's active involvement in preparing and reviewing the multi-year financial plan. It's a very robust discussion. Board members are free. If you have a finance committee, the finance committee can look at things in detail, but they are presenting to the board, and the board should ask any questions they need to. It's your degree of comfort around this. So there's good discussion on resource allocation, funding plans, investment objectives, content all related to the strategic goals that you want to accomplish. And then there's ongoing monitoring. So the board monitors financial statements regularly. There are key performance indicators on how you're doing. There's well-prepared staff that can explain variances and discuss potentials and corrective actions. So there's no surprises coming because there's a trust-based communication with staff. And if there are big threats on the horizon, you're aware of them and you know about them. One of the things which agencies are facing right now in Ontario is the Ontario government looking at cutbacks to social services. So there should be no surprises there. If the Ontario government is indicating we're looking like we're going to be reducing your budget, you want to be knowing about that. You want to be knowing what's the action plans around that. Fiduciary other regulatory compliance, so ensures timely independent audit of the results and internal processes. It understands the compliance that's required to the regulatory bodies. There's feedback from the auditors and regulators with forms and basis, and a recovery plan. So if you have a larger organization that's operating with a budget of over 100,000, you're going to have a public audited statement. And you want to make sure that your audited statement reflects truly the organizational position. And if there are things that need to be improved, often an auditor will have a management letter that goes with that around their recommendations. So the board wants to be receiving all of that. If your organization is under 100,000, you probably don't require an auditor, but you do require an independent review. But you can also have an annual general meeting if your organization has a small, very small budget, where you can waive the need for an independent review. But 100% of your annual members have to vote in favor of that. And then you can have an internal statement. And there are some organizations that are very small. Some of you will be in this category, where your annual membership waives that requirement, and then your internal statement is fine. Now, the Not-for-Profit Canada, Corporations Canada, can request to see that at any time, of course. And if you're a registered charity, it is probably, the CRA can certainly request to see that at any time, and they'll probably want to see that on your annual 1030 review that gets posted for the world to look at. Board risk management. So you're annually reviewing the potential sources of risk in the mitigation plans. So Chris Govern has a great risk management template that you can look at around those areas, and commend all of that to you. And if you remember, Chris had a nice way of analyzing risks in terms of impact and likelihood. So is it high or is it low? And if you look at the far right-hand upper corner there, where the impact is high and the likelihood is high, and let's say you've got that letter from the Ontario government and they're looking at reducing your budget by 30%, and you're heavily dependent upon the Ontario government for funding, then immediate action and control required. What are the strategies that you're going to use? Are you going to be advocating? We have an excellent example of families and services for autistic children advocating this year, and having the government change its mind on several issues. But if you're not successful in the advocating, what are you going to do in order to have a contingency plan for that 30%? What's your strategy? Okay. So there are sample board assessment tools here around monitoring organizational performance too, around programming and monitoring human resources. And then one of the things which OrgWise has added, which I like too, is accommodation, IT capacity. So what's the hard stuff that you need? What's the soft stuff that you need? So if we look at nose in and fingers out around program, we usually leave program to staff, but the board wants to ensure that the programs are working. So the participatory DIME is one thing that I use. You have participatory design, implementation, and monitoring of the program. So stakeholders and clients are involved. And the report backs are related to the strategic plan. So you don't have a program that's operating and it's not in your strategic plan. And the reports are SMART. And SMART stands for specific. So the goals are well defined and clear. They're measurable. The goals enable you to evaluate whether or not you're meeting the goal. And they're attainable, they're realistic. They're not so far out that you can't ever attain those things. They can be seen as making progress. They're relevant, so they are meeting the needs of the community, the stakeholders, and the board feels that they are relevant. And then they're time-based. So the goals, you're going to come to an end where you can say, did we do it or not? And you can measure it along the way. And Mackenzie has a drill down on this, the board's involvement in developing performance metrics. So you're working with staff for the outcome metrics and the goals, and the targets are being set according to a strategic plan for 1 to 3 years. And you can have performance comparable to institutions around that are doing similar things. Just to be aware of that too. For example, if you have an employment services program with adults and you're working with an agency that's fairly upscale, you may have some fairly good success rates with adult employment programs. If you're working with prisoners that are coming out of 3 years in a federal penitentiary, then you're going to have a harder time. So you want to be knowing that your performance measurements are able to be realistic, and that you can talk about the differences and why it's important that you put more effort and time into certain clientele populations in order to receive similar results. You got a process for monitoring. So it routinely monitors and discusses the performance of the program and uses results to inform the strategic plan, the resource allocation, and the evaluation of the chief executive officer. So you get an idea of how things are going. There are many organizations that have moved to looking at trying to describe things in terms of quantity and quality, in terms of informatics. So have you got 1 or 2 pages that sum up everything, and you can see it all in one picture? And it's not just the numbers, but also the quality. The last 25 years, as you know, in evaluation, we have sacrificed quality for quantity. And often funders will say, you need to get your numbers up. And you want to be able to argue when you have to that it's not just numbers. We need to put the time in for quality of service here. The numbers are secondary to the quality that's being delivered. So the board identifies primary stakeholders and ensures that the performance results are communicated back to the stakeholders. We're seeing this message come up again, time and time again, in various different areas that the board needs to be looking at. And there's a process for obtaining and using feedback from stakeholders. So you've got that continuous improvement. How are we doing feedback mechanism coming? So what ways does the board ensure that those things are being done? Sometimes they're very hard. I've sat on boards of directors that serve children, and often the adults come up with the metrics, and often the adults come up with the ways of designing the program. To what degree are we able to sit down with children and understand children needs and say, and help so that the children can actually define for us the program? We can put it into adult words. We can check back with them and say, this is what you mean. Then we can go after the funders and those people that speak adult and look at performance metrics. But to what degree are the people for whom we are trying to serve, on all of our stakeholders, to what degree are they able to participate and give us feedback on how we are doing? How are they able to design? Are they able to help us monitor? Are they able to help us evaluate how we are doing? And that we can articulate that to the rest of the world. So human resource policy. So OrgWise has a nice statement here. 3 big areas: promoting a positive and equitable work environment, hiring, engagement, and retention of staff, and managing volunteers and students. And some nice drill downs here on the work environment, positive, equitable, safe, promoting a positive staff relations climate, and the collegial working relationships. If you have a union, if applicable. I sat on a board of directors that was unionized, and the union rep was on the board. And the only time the union rep was excluded from the board was when there was a vote on the salary grid, because they were directly in a conflict of interest with all the unionized members. But I also sat on boards of directors where there was a voluntary recognition of bringing staff into the union. This was an international board. So the organization was organized for its Canadian staff, but not organized for its overseas staff. And so the board wanted a way, and the union wanted a way, to bring locally engaged staff overseas into the collective bargaining unit. And they worked out that way in terms of not salary that was the exact amount in Canadian dollars, but in salary that had equal purchasing power wherever that person was. So there are ways in which unionized environments and management can work together in a collegial way. The hiring practices are inclusive and they're transparent and they're effective. They have clear, fair, and effective performance management systems. So there is an annual evaluation of the CEO, of the senior staff, of all the way down the line into front line. There could even be an evaluations for your volunteers and for your students. All of those things are being done, and they're being done in clear, transparent ways. The goal here is that your annual performance evaluation has no surprises. You are aware of those things. If there's remedial training that's needed, there are provisions within the HR policy and within the budget for those things to occur, and that you are not facing sudden dismissals or dismissals that can be challenged in court, and also that there's a clear procedure mechanism for staff appeal within the organization at various different levels, all the way up to the board of directors or the HR committee of the board, and even beyond that if needed.
We've got a bit of our audio connection has been lost.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And we're back.
Okay, great. So the last part there is around managing volunteers and students. So sometimes we forget to include volunteers and students in the life of the agency and in the human resource policies of the agency and the ways in which we assist in managing folks. So are volunteers an important part? Are they recognized? Are students brought in if there's an employee assistance program for staff? Does that also extend to volunteers? If there's insurance policies for staff, are there insurance policies for students? Often we think that the college or the university will have those policies. To what extent do they cover things? To what extent do we say we want to be able to welcome and have policies for our volunteers and students? So the one thing I've added here, which is not often found in most of the typical kinds of tools, is ways in which you can look at the accommodation and your IT capacity within the organization and to see, is that adequate? So org-wise has a nice statement here. Our organization's working spaces reflect the organization program and service needs and priorities. So the hard equipment, the place itself where the office is adequate. It's conductive to work. It's a safe place, and people feel good about going there. We had an office, I sat on the board of directors where the office was located in a place where the roof leaked, and twice a year under big storms, that roof would leak. So we had to find ways to get that roof repaired, and ultimately we changed sites. We moved. It was not a safe working condition. The building had deteriorated. The organization has and implements policies and procedures related to knowledge and information management. So in the old days, we'd say there's a filing cabinet and people know where to find things. There's a filing system. You can look things up. And there'd be some of those filing cabinets that would be locked because they would have confidential information on personnel or confidential information on clients. These days, how do we do that electronically? Is there a filing system that people understand and can get information from? And are those safeguarded? So that if there's confidential information, you need the appropriate passwords and keys to get into that information. So all of those things have to be ensured that there's those conditions in the board. Any questions that you've got on part 3? And you're going to email those into to Emily when you have those. Great.
Yes. Looking forward to receiving your questions. Again, the email address is emooney, EMOONEY @ocasi.org.
So in the last section here, how does the board improve its own performance? How do we enable ourselves to be getting better and better and better? So we want to look at the size and structure of the board. We want to look at the composition of the board. We want to look at the leadership skills at the board and the processes that the board uses to evaluate itself. So the sources here, org-wise, we're going to look at, and Accreditation Canada also has a great website that you can move towards being accredited as a not-for-profit and a registered charity social service organization. And they have a number of tools and assessment tools that you can use there. So org-wise, just simple things here. Our board structure and model enable work to get done effectively. So we could ask that, you know, and it's just sort of that things are going well or things are not going well. And then you can start to look at, you know, what's good, what's not. Our board plans and operates effectively. So we have time for planning. We've got a strategic plan. We've got an annual board plan, and we're following it. And it looks like we are doing okay. We are satisfied that we're covering all the important things. The board has systems and processes in place to ensure stability and renewal. So if there is turnover, is it expected? Is it regular? Do we have folks going off of elected terms? We have new folks coming on. Are there enough veterans on the board that the wisdom of the organization, the collective responsibility of the board is not lost? So are those things in place so that we are recruiting folks that we need, we're retaining the folks that we need, and the folks who are coming to term expiry or being on the board for 6 years, if you have a time limit, are able to leave, and we are able to replace them with the folks that we need. Board members understand their roles and responsibilities and the opportunities for growth and development. So is there a job description for your board member? Often we will have a job description or position description for the board chair and the vice chair and the treasurer, the secretary of the board. Those executive officers often have job descriptions. Does the board members have a job description? Do you know what you're responsible for? And then, are there areas that you would like to grow in as a board member? So if you do a skills matrix of the board, are you lacking in areas? And if you can't find somebody to bring their expertise in that area, then what ways does the board want to learn to be able to know something about that area? So what's the board education plan for itself and for yourselves growing as board members? Principles of anti-oppression are embedded in the board policies and practices. OCASI, OrgWise, and On Board Canada, Diversity on Board, really good, excellent examples of this. And of course, there are lots of anti-oppression templates and practices that you can download. So Accreditation Canada here, governance functioning tool. This is free from the Accreditation Canada website. They have, of course, a whole series that you can take online towards working towards accreditation. But if you look at these ones here, actively recruit, recommend, or select new board members based on the needs for particular skills, background, and expertise. So it means that you've done some analysis of what the board has for expertise and what's lacking. The explicit criteria. The renewal cycle is appropriate. The composition of the governing board allows to meet stakeholder and community needs. I've sat on boards that are 3 members and everybody is stretched. We sat on boards of 25 where it's so big things get confusing. So what's the appropriate number that you need in order to get the work done that the board needs to do? Clear written policies with terms of lengths and limits for individual board members. Governance policies and procedures that define the role. Subcommittees, when needed, that clearly have defined roles, mandates, and responsibilities. Terms of references. Roles and responsibilities clearly identified and distinguished from those delegated to the CEO. So the board knows its role, CEO and senior management know their role. And you can rate all of these from 1 to 5, or you don't know. If you drill down here, ongoing education and professional development is encouraged. That's for the board of directors. Working relationship amongst individual board members and committees are positive. We have a process to set bylaws and corporate policies. So if you, first of all, do you know your bylaws? I've sat on boards of directors where they have an excellent orientation package, the articles of incorporation, the bylaws, the annual report, the annual financial statement, the mission, mandate, vision, and program descriptions are all part of that. I've also sat on boards that can't remember where their bylaws are and haven't looked at them in years and just assume that they are operating on them. If those bylaws need to be changed, they're not sure how to change them. Their annual general meeting process is very vague. They don't know where the corporate incorporation papers are. In fact, are they in a safe somewhere in the office? Are they with the past board chair? People can't find them. We've had to go hunting for them. So that's not the appropriate way in which you want your board to operate. Your board is operating there without a foundation. And then when you take on a new program, maybe your board is really good in identifying needs in the community, and a new need has emerged and you're able to find the resources to meet that need, great. Is it in your articles of incorporation that it's okay? Is that in your objects? Is that one of the objects of the corporation that you can be meeting that need? If not, you can be in big trouble with your funder and big trouble with the government. So these are important things to know. And it gets down to simple things as individual members, we receive adequate feedback about our contribution to the governing body. So is there an annual evaluation at the board? It includes some of the things that you do well. So if you look at some of the drill downs here, the OODP has a nice one on size. So is the board composition appropriate? Members have skill sets, expertise to cover off the areas that are needed, lived experience for the clientele that you are trying to serve, human resources, finance, law, social and health services, and you can rate those. The board size is appropriate. The officers have clearly defined roles. There's an up-to-date board governance manual, so part of the board orientation package. It can be the same package, but you know all your constituting documents are in your bylaws. The executive committee has a clear role that's well understood and supported by all board members. You're not in a position where the executive committee seems to be making all the decisions. John Carter talks about this when you get an inner board and an outer board, but the executive committee, if it's needed, is not taking on all of the decisions of the board. It has limited responsibilities. Often executive committees will meet over the summertime if the board is away. And they're serving as valuable advice to the board and the executive director. And all new board members receive a clear orientation on their roles. These things keep coming back on the responsibilities and expectations, including fiduciary duties. So if you look at sample board assessment tools here around composition and recruitment and education, 3 matrices that are available for you. You can download these from the PowerPoint, take a look at them, print them out. But here's your board member's name and when did they start, when did they end, what's their skills around fundraising, corporations and individuals, their fundraising skills around government and the foundation, specific programming skills, corporate governance experience, finance and risk management experience, marketing and communication experience, law, strategic development and strategic planning experience, organizational experience in HR and IT. If you have a large board of directors and you're looking at subcommittees, there's the formation there for the chairs of your subcommittees. So are you covering these needs, which are usually the big needs of a board of directors, to have skills in these areas. And then a little bit more specific, you start to drill down. So is there expertise around strategic planning and strategies, board program evaluation? Do folks have some background in that they can bring to the board? Succession planning, governance, finance, law, committee structures, marketing, technology, government relations, HR, intellectual disabilities. This particular drill down was from a community living organization that saw it very important to have our clientele have a strong voice on the board of directors. Is there consensus building skills? Does the chair have a great skill in this? Do other people have skill in this? Networking, being able to be out into the community and knowing what's going on. Fundraising and innovation. Innovation is moving so fast. Do we have folks that are up on this? Do we have folks know about the trends? If you're reading Yuval Harari and Homo Deus, what are the big things that are going to impact us by 2030, which is actually not too far away? And then do we have a potential leader here? Are they very experienced, some experience, or no significant experience? So you begin to rate your board, find out what are the skills you're strong on, what are the skills you need to find. The Chartered Public Accountants of Canada have a sample matrix here that you can look at in terms of enterprise and leadership, governance, industry, finance. More and more organizations are looking at social enterprise, and can you build in? Oh, yeah.
We've lost our audio again.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry about that. We lost our audio briefly, but we are back.
Okay, nice to be back with you. So the Chartered Professional Accountants Association has a great drill down here on director competency matrix, core board knowledge, skills, experiences, enterprise leadership. So more and more, as you know, not-for-profits and registered charities are being encouraged to have a section of the agency that earns income. So that could be a fee structure, it could be a small for-profit wing. The classic example here is the Salvation Army and their thrift store. So 100% of the profits from the Salvation Army thrift store go back to the registered charity. So is there an enterprise expertise on the board? And then the governance sections that we've looked at and the program-specific finances, strategy. Are you, in terms of your communication, being able to create and talk about value creation? Is it appropriate for the agency to grow when it is not appropriate? All the different things that can involve down here. And you can see here, if you're with an agency that owns property, perhaps has a residence, what's the expertise on the board in terms of real estate and property management? And then what's the conflict of interest in your bylaws, so that if a person brings expertise in the board and property management, but you need to have repairs, what is the conflict of interest that says that they can't vote on that, they can't bid on that? If they're a not-for-profit agency, there are rules, but if you're a registered charity, it's forbidden. So to know those things. And then they talk about diversity also, and is there gender balance on the board? Do you have cultural representation on the board, especially from clientele that you're seeing? Does it reflect the diversity? If you're from a Toronto organization, is your board of directors reflecting the cultural diversity of Toronto or any other place you are? Is there rural-urban balance on it? Is there sexual identity balance on it? So Onboard Canada has some excellent online process here that you can learn from. They've developed this in cooperation with the Alliance for Healthy Communities. They identify those kinds of barriers, and then we'll help with you towards developing a plan for integrating diversity and an action plan to implement it. And they have a whole drill down list here of what you can look at, and they'd be pleased to assist you with this. And as I say, this is a free resource this year if you're a member of the Maximizing Governance project from the city and from OCASI.
I would just like to add that there are about 10 slots left in the onboard training that is available to participants of the Maximizing Governance project. You can visit the Maximizing Governance website. That is at ocasi.org/maximizing-governance for the registration link for the onboard training. The Embedding Diversity and Inclusion into an Organization course is available as a bonus course. There are 2 other courses available. You can choose one of them, and then the diversity one as well.
Great, thanks, Emily. So I commend those to you, and they're not always free, folks. So use them. So just leadership, just a nice little chart here that gives you feedback to the chair. How is the chair doing? So you could use that tool to let the chair know, and annually or when you need to, are you doing those things? And then just rating your own processes here. So board calendar. Do you have a way of ensuring all the things that you need to do are done annually? And look at this, the date of the board meeting so everybody knows. The approval of the budget, when's that going to happen? The board orientation, when's that going to happen for board members? Some boards like to have do the orientation with new board members. The whole board is there. Sometimes they've forgotten stuff they need to know too. But the board should be orienting its own board members. When are you going to do a board self-evaluation? Are you going to do a small meeting evaluation every time? How did the meeting go? Are you going to do an annual evaluation to see how are we doing in these big areas that we've just been looking at? When's the evaluation of the Chief Executive Officer? When are we going to review and have acceptance of the auditor's report? What's the time of the year we're going to recruit and have nominations for the board? When's the annual general meeting? What are the things that we're going to accomplish there? What's the operational policy review on how we're doing in meeting our strategic planning goals for the year? Is there a review of bylaws and reserves and investments? If we're lucky enough to have a reserve fund, if we're lucky enough to be able to invest our funds, are we doing those according to what we want to do? If we're an environmental organization, is our investment policy green? Are we following the ethical standards of green investments? Maybe all not-for-profits would like to do that. Is there a board staff annual planning retreat? All those things can be in the calendar. And you see an example here. This is from the Institute of Corporate Directors, and they have a whole course in this. They love for you to sign up. It's a pricey course, but it covers a lot of stuff. But here's January, February, March, April. Something is happening in each one of those that is going to come up annually. Sometimes it's every board meeting, sometimes it's quarterly, but at least you know that those things that have to be covered annually are there, and you can see that all the way to December. So another one from Effective Governance Australia. I don't want to think that the Australians are ahead of the Canadians in this year, but there's a nice drill down here that you can download and look at. Are we covering all of those things in our board? And then you can check off. When are you going to do that? January, February, March, all the way to December. We're getting close to the end of our time together, so you can look at this nice drill down. It covers everything. How do you know, are you covering everything on a board meeting that you should be? So here's a nice checklist for you. All those items that you want to ensure that the board of directors is looking at each meeting. So do you have an in-camera session? Do you have a planning meeting beforehand just to go over without the chief executive officer present? Say, these are the things we're going to cover. Should we be adding anything else? Then you have your staff, the CEO come in. You have the standard things. Often there are any director conflict of interest disclosures right away. at the beginning. Is there something coming up that needs to be decided, and you may have a director that is not allowed to vote on that, and they should declare that. And the standard things that you've got there, and the matters for decision. Nice checklist of the Chief Executive Officer's report, the Finance Director or the CFO's report, committee meetings, minutes, reports, any major decisions, major correspondence, anything to deal with incorporation around the company's seal that needs to be updated, anything on the board calendar. It's a nice drill down list, including towards the end there, meeting evaluation. How did it go? Okay. And of course, what's the next meeting date to remind everybody? It's a nice checklist. How well does the board conduct itself? You can do a little evaluation here at the end of each board meeting. And there's nice ways you can rate yourself. And then you can give that all to the board chair, and they can give that feedback to you when they summarize it up. And there's a little list here at the bottom that says, for this year, the board's noted the following issues and challenges for focus over the next year. And in your opinion, how well has the board dealt with them? And you can itemize those things in terms of succession planning, policy development, other things that you need. And you can do a actual quantitative rating there. So, any questions on board self-enabling or board effectiveness?
We do have a few questions that have come in by email.
Okay, great.
First one is, my question is related to board bylaws. I'd like to know if there is pro bono help available in terms of revising an organization's bylaws.
Yes, so there's a couple of areas you want to be aware of here. First of all, Management Advisory Service will help folks review their bylaws. We won't write the bylaws for you. We can go over your existing bylaws. We can look at modern templates. We like the federal template at the moment. The Ontario template is sort of in limbo. The Ontario Not-for-Profit Corporations Act doesn't have the regulations at this point that are necessary to really revise your bylaws provincially and know that you won't have to revise them again in 2 years. But the federal bylaws are not bad to look at as a template. We'll make you do the work. We'll review them. We'll say, okay, we think this paragraph could be rewritten. This paragraph, we can suggest some words for you, and then you would rewrite them. Send them back to us. We'll come out and look at them and tell you whether we think that they're great, whether they're lawyer ready, and then we suggest that you send them to a lawyer for vetting. That you may be lucky enough to have a lawyer on your board of directors, and they could look at that. Pro bono law Ontario still exists. The last time I looked at them, they were facing the same kind of budget cuts that a lot of folks are facing in Ontario funding. But they would, as part of their mandate, review not-for-profit corporate sector bylaws, ensure that they are effective and compliant with laws. So they will do that. The other folks you might want to look at are Endeavor. Endeavor is like Mass. They're a pro bono consulting group, and they cluster their requests, and then they'll send folks out to you at a particular time of the year. So yes, those resources are available. You can also, of course, go to the law firms that have a lot of experience in this. There are 3 of them. The ones that come to my mind, of course, are Carter's, have been doing this a while. Mark Bloomberg at Bloomberg has been doing this for quite a while. There's a third body too that Graham Boyce knows quite well, and they'll charge you some money, but they'll also give you the not-for-profit rate.
And the next question.
Yep.
What about board composition for a working board that has knowledge in the subject at hand? For example, medical society, and having physicians, nurses, etc., who may not have HR, finance, or law backgrounds. What's the appropriate numbers and composition relative to what's mentioned about board skills?
Yes. So I think the board composition is dependent upon what you need. So if you're feeling, that you've got adequate representation around the medical skills, the doctors and nurses, the other folks that you need, and allied health workers on your board, so that you feel your program is good, but you are lacking in HR folks. You want those folks to be in sufficient number that their voice is heard. Now, sometimes that's one person. Sometimes that one person can, you have good sway. Sometimes you might need a couple more. You just want to make sure that all voices that are representing the skills that you need have the ability to speak and the time to say that, and they're not always overruled by somebody who may not have the skills in that area and not willing to listen to that area.
And this looks to be the last question. If you have a democratic society where members vote on the board, how do you ensure board diversity without impairing the democratic process?
Okay, so Canada, as you know, has this history of racism, history of discrimination, and we do tend to have, you can't see me, but I'm an old white guy. I'm an old white Anglo-Saxon Protestant male, one of the